Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet?
I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will.
Yeah, right.
I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne insider and Todd Fuhrman.
All right, it is that time once again with the football season fast approaching. It's time to start deep diving some of these college football teams as we head into the 2024 season. We're obviously going to start with the G5 conferences. We'll start it off with the worst to the best as far as the G5 goes. Could not get Payne nor Todd to come in and do these. They said, hey, we think you have this handled, so you go ahead and do all the Group of 5 conferences. You can fly solo. We trust you. We have belief in you. And the next 5 podcasts, if you don't like Brad Powers, well, I'm afraid I've got some bad news. You got me for the next 5 podcasts as far as previewing, and we are going to preview every single one of the G5 teams starting today with our 2024 Conference USA preview. And then next week, we'll tackle the MAC, followed by the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, and then we'll finish up the Group of 5 with the American before Todd and Payne join me as far as the Power 4. That's right, Power 4 previews coming up here in about a month or so from now. But there's not a lot of content as far as G5 goes so far in the last 5 months as we get closer and closer to the 2024 season. Not a lot of content, period, when it comes to smaller schools. So I thought I'd break the seal a little bit here. Let's get you some info as far as breaking down these teams. And without further ado, let's not beat around the bush. Let's get right to it here. We're going to start off the preview series with the brand new team to the FBS, Kennesaw State. Just so happens to be, as of right now, as we're doing this, as I'm recording this on May 21st, dead last in my power ratings. Kennesaw State, obviously first year of FBS play, comes over from the FCS. Last year, kind of a transitional season for them. They went 3-6. All 3 wins for them came against Division II opponents. Not FCS, Division II opponents. So it wasn't a good look for them as far as not being able to even get an FCS win a year ago. They did go 0-5 in games decided by 7 points or less. Statistically, much better than a 3-6 team. They outscored their opponents by 8 points per game. Yards per play margin was plus a yard on average per play. So I had them power rating Kennesaw State like an average FCS team. And to put that in perspective, your average FCS team is going to be about 4 touchdowns worse than your average FBS team. Not average Group of 5. I'm talking counting the Power 5 or the Power 4 and the G5. Your average FBS team is going to be about 4 touchdowns better than your average FCS team. Before I start into it here, as far as breaking down this year's team, let me just, some of you probably don't even know where the hell Kennesaw State is. It's a northwest suburb of Atlanta, so recruiting hotbed there. They do have to compete. They're never going to compete with Georgia Tech, but other schools in the area, Georgia Southern, obviously Georgia State, they'll be right in the mix there as far as competing with those 2 Sun Belt teams. But Kennesaw State is going to start off in Conference USA there, but they had some recent success. Maybe not the last couple of years as far as going 8-14, but prior to that, Kennesaw State was a top 15 FCS program. I mean, they were 49-10 from 2017 to 2021. So it wasn't too long ago that this was a really good program, making multiple quarterfinals as far as the FCS playoffs. They have the same head coaches they've had for the last decade. Brian Bohannon entering his 10th year here. If you're not familiar with him, why should you be if you're not betting FCS football? Bohannon was assistant coach prior to getting this head coaching job a decade ago. He was under Paul Johnson, Georgia Southern, Navy, and Georgia Tech. He followed Paul Johnson in all 3 of those stops. They have lost some coaches here in the last few years to Navy, and maybe that's been one of the reasons why they've dipped as far as their overall strength. So that's something to keep an eye on. Another thing to keep an eye on, I know when people are asking me, well, how are they going to transition to the first year of FBS? It's been so-so. There isn't really a significant value to fade or follow teams, generally speaking. I looked at the last 12 years. last dozen or so teams that have made the jump from FCS to FBS. And, against the spread, if you just look at those teams in their first year of FBS play, we're talking a sample size of 170-plus games, right around 50%. So no value fading the team in their first year. Average wins per season, right around 5 and 7 is the average record. For every James Madison you have and Jacksonville State, you got Sam Houston State, Coastal Carolina, Charlotte, teams that have struggled to go 3-9 in their first year. And speaking of this year's Kennesaw State team, they do have one thing they have going for them is they have experience. 15 returning starters, 7 on offense, 8 on defense. They do lose their quarterback, Jonathan Murphy. He was more of a runner than passer. But they do bring back their leading rusher and their leading receiver along with 3 starters on the offensive line. Some names you need to know as far as standout players for them. Running back Michael Benefield was a guy that stood out on tape. Yeah, I did watch some Kennesaw State tape. I watched the Sam Houston State game and the Fuhrman game. At least 2 teams that I thought would be, at least comparably speaking, to what they'd be facing this fall. Wide receiver Gabriel Benyard is another player. Watching the spring game, and I didn't catch every single play of the spring game, but I saw a bunch of highlights. Davis Bryson looks like he'll be their starter, or at least he was getting a majority of the snaps in the spring. Again, he's more runner than passer, similar to their quarterback last year in Murphy. A guy that really stood out as far as, looking at, looks a hell of a lot different than a lot of the other players on the roster. They got a guy that plays running back and tight end. His name's Preston Daniel. He's 5'11", 260. And can run, so he's a guy that'll be noticeable, at least getting off the bus. One thing, you want to read the tea leaves, maybe some of the weaknesses for Kennesaw State as they transition. One thing they did this offseason is they certainly made a commitment to shoring up their offensive line for FBS play. 11 new offensive linemen this year as far as freshmen and transfers. 11 on the offensive line alone that they bring in. Defensively, they do lose their top 2 tacklers, but besides that, they're relatively experienced. 10 of their next 12 top tacklers return. As far as, I feel like I got to cover the bases here. What are you going to see as far as stylistically from offense and defense for Kennesaw State? Offensively, they run kind of a spread option offense. It's not triple option. It's from the spread principles, but they will run their quarterback. And then defensively, at least a couple games that I watched from last season, a 4-2-5 base defense. Coordinators are new this year, but they promoted from within. So, again, I expect somewhat similar schemes there. Let's talk schedule here. And let me say this, and I should have led this off. For those of you looking for a best bet, I'm afraid, again, I have some bad news. Win totals are not up yet for Conference USA. However, when they do get available and when they become more widely available, I'll double back to this conference and be more than happy to give you guys a season win total best bet from this conference on a future podcast. So make sure you're listening in the future weeks. There might be a couple podcasts where I have multiple, and maybe one podcast where I have 3-4 best bets as far as out of Group of 5 conference play. On a similar note, let's talk the schedule for Kennesaw State, because I'm going to break it down to what I think the win total should be around. The reality is I think they could be an underdog in every game this year. They have some winnable games, though, on the bright side. UT Martin, Sam Houston State, FIU, all at home, all winnable games. They kind of, if I look at the team strength and I look at how the schedule lays out for them, they remind me a lot of Sam Houston State last year. Probably not many wins, but I expect them to be competitive like they were against Sam Houston State last year, like they were against a top 10 FCS team in Fuhrman. I expect them to be competitive. I upgraded their power rating from last year, from where it was at the end of the season. And I don't think it's certainly not going to be a winning season, but I think they'll be competitive, at least against the bottom teams in Conference USA. Speaking of the bottom teams in Conference USA, FIU is next in line. As far as I'm starting from the bottom and I'm going to work my way up to the top, you can guess who's at the top. They played in the Fiesta Bowl last year. So next team on the docket, though, is FIU, a team that's worse than their record the last couple of years, at least statistically. It's a team that's 4-8 each of the last 2 years, but again, worse than their record for the second year in a row. Last year, they were 4-1 in games decided by 7 points or less. They didn't control the line of scrimmage, FIU. They were minus 29 in sack differential, and that's basically how many sacks you get on defense and subtract how many sacks you allowed on offense. Minus 29. Minus 1.9 in yards per carry differential. So, again, getting owned at the line of scrimmage. Number 110 in yards per play margin, 128 in yards per game margin, 122 in points per game margin out of 133 teams last year at the FBS level. So, in my power rankings, this is a bottom 5 team. This year's team has some above-average returning production for FIU, 15 returning starters, 9 on offense, 6 on defense, 4 on the offensive line. That's their most experienced unit. I do have some concerns, though, because diving into it, 15 returning starters. Who out of those 15, who are the key guys? Well, the reality is that their key guys actually are the guys that have departed. Best player on the team, I thought, rewatching some tape, I particularly watched the Arkansas game at the end of last season, wide receiver Chris Mitchell transferred to Notre Dame. And I think he's going to start at Notre Dame. So a high-quality kid that had 1,000-plus yards from receiving and didn't have good quarterback play, good quarterback throwing in the football on a consistent basis. Highest-graded offensive lineman last year for FIU, Phillip Houston, went to Colorado. Highest-graded defender on the defensive line, the Girard kid, went to Louisville. So that's three Power 4 transfers out of there. Their leading tackler, another guy that stood out, at least on tape, number 10 last year, Donovan Manuel, had 120 tackles, 15.5 tackles for loss. He's gone. So, do the math, folks. A lot of the top guys off the team. As far as the guys coming back, Jenkins is back at quarterback, but he's got to be better. 11-11 ratio. This isn't 1994 anymore. It's 2024, and you can't have an 11-11 touchdown-interception ratio. So that's got to get better if they want to improve on the 4-8 record. The one thing that I do think is the strength of their offense, and maybe their entire team, I like their running backs. Shamari Lawrence and Owens, for me, both of those guys flashed on tape consistently in multiple games. Generally speaking, I upgraded this team's power rating from last year, but I'm not sure it translates to more wins. Again, it's going to be a bunch of close games, and when you've won close games for the last 2 years, can you count on that to happen again for a third year in a row? I'm not so sure. 8 of their games I have power rated at less than a touchdown. They are 6-2 in close games the last 2 years, including a 3-0 record in overtime. But some of the signs that are worrying me, I do like Mike McIntyre, who's their head coach. Worst recruiting class in 10 years. For an older coach like Mike McIntyre, is that kind of a bad omen? I don't know. That's something to keep track of. They do have some staff continuity. This is his 3rd year. And also the OCDC combo, all entering year 3. So that's a positive in today's day and age of college football, where there's so much, transfer portal, and then obviously so much lack of continuity as far as coaching staffs go. So this is a team that's probably better than the last 2 years, considering I had them in the bottom 2, 3, 4 teams in my power ratings the last 2 years. I'm not sure that they get better than 4-8 though. So that's my thoughts on FIU. Moving along here, we're going to go to Louisiana Tech. Another team probably, going to be in the bottom 10 if anybody's doing a power rating here. Louisiana Tech fresh off 3 straight 3-9 seasons. And it hasn't been a good look for Louisiana Tech under Sonny Cumbie. 6-18 under him. Last year I was watching, he was talking during one of the post-game practices in the spring. He talked about he only had 32 scholarship players entering last spring. And I don't recall that at all, because what I do recall is right here on this Conference USA preview podcast is I gave an over 5.5 bet recommendation on Louisiana Tech. And had I known they had 32 scholarship players, you best be damn sure I wouldn't have been going over 5.5. So I don't recollect that. And in fact, they were relatively okay experience-wise, particularly in offense last year. So I'm not sure that I'll take him for his word there, but my goodness, if that was true, then I missed the boat completely on Louisiana Tech last year. He did, speaking towards this year, 32 last year scholarship entering spring, 62 scholarships entering spring this year, so they're in better shape from a depth perspective. One thing they haven't done well, unlike FIU in close games, they haven't won them 1-7 the last 2 years, decided by one possession. And it's the usual suspects as far as why they're losing close games for Louisiana Tech. Number 115 in penalty yards last year, -9 in turnovers. Penalties and turnovers, that'll get you beat in close games. Got to clean that up if they got to be better. One thing that they were okay last year in, offensively. They were pretty average offense. I mean, nationally, 65 in yards per play, 68 in yards per game, 78 in points per game. Offense did enough to certainly win more than 3 games. Defense obviously been the issue, ranking in the hundreds as far as yards per play, yards per game, points per game. That's been an issue for them each of the first 2 years under Sonny Cumbie. A guy, maybe it shouldn't be that surprising, a coach, young coach, that's more known on the offensive side of the ball. Where they've really struggled on both sides is the line of scrimmage. I mean, they haven't controlled it. In fact, they've been dominated, minus 1.6 in net yards per carry last year. This year's team, lightly experienced, even though they got more scholarship players. A lot of the scholarship players don't have a lot of experience because they only have 7 returning starters, 2 on offense, 5 on defense for Louisiana Tech. They're going to be in the bottom 10 to 15 as far as if you think returning starters, that's old. Well, why are you giving me a 2004 stat, Brad? I need returning production. Well, they're still going to be Louisiana Tech in the bottom 10, 15 teams in returning production. 0 skill position starters return on offense. Bachmeier, who leaves a lot to be desired, actually played okay for them last year. I'll tell you, other guys that played well for them, their 3 wide receivers, Smoke Harris, Cyrus Allen, Kyle Maxwell, all played well for Louisiana Tech last year. And just to put it in perspective, they did have some talent on offense last year. 4 offensive starters transferred to Power 4 schools. And the guy that I really liked, who I thought was the best player on their team last year, Cyrus Allen at wide receiver, he's at Texas A&M right now. And I like him quite a bit. So a lot of loss there as far as production. As far as returning production, Jack Turner at quarterback got a bunch of snaps at quarterback last year, 148 pass attempts. But clearly, look at him any way you want to shape it, statistically, was a downgrade from Bachmeier. So that concerns me. Must concern the coaching staff because they went out and got a JUCO kid by the name of Ty Keys. Used to be at Southern Miss before he went to JUCO ranks. He's their highest-rated quarterback recruit ever. Go back and watch. Southern Miss played Alabama a few years ago. Ty Keys was playing. Kid has some talent. So I wouldn't be as shocked if he ended up winning the starting job when it's all said and done. On the defensive side of the ball, they got a new defensive coordinator. His name's Jeremiah Johnson. No relation to the character played by Robert Redford in the 1970s. I think Johnson's a quality defensive coordinator. Comes from Northern Iowa. If you have any clue as far as FCS defense, in the last 2 decades, Northern Iowa has been one of the better defenses in the FCS for the last 2 decades, and he's been there for a majority of the last 2 decades. Problem is he loses top 4 tacklers on defense for as far as this year's Louisiana Tech team. So that's a concern. So a lot of concern on both sides, and I don't think they make that big jump. If you're looking for a bowl game in year 3 under Sonny Cumbie, don't think that's the case. Can they top 3-9 though, which they've had each of the last 3 years? I think that's certainly possible. But they gotta, if they're thinking anything about flirting with bowl eligibility, gotta clean up penalties, gotta clean up turnovers. A lot to be desired in that department, at least from what I've seen the last couple of years. So not a strong take, really not a strong take in any of these first 3 teams I've talked about. We'll have some stronger ones, starting with this team in UTEP, believe it or not, a team that's got a heavy transition, but I'm a big fan of their hire. And their new head coach is Scotty Walden is his name. He's only 34 years old, but this is already his 4th different head coaching stop already. He's been successful, and he's won at each stop. 34-20 record already. Austin Peay is where he's coming from. His last stop took him to the playoffs last year. Austin Peay hasn't historically been a great FCS program. They found some success here recently, but the one thing, if you pop in the tape, last couple of years, and I do watch a lot of FCS versus FBS games because I usually have money on them. Austin Peay the last 2 years played 3 FBS schools: Western Kentucky, Alabama, and Tennessee. 3-0 against the spread in those 3 games. Average cover by 21 points per game. Pop in the Tennessee tape last year. More than competitive against Tennessee. I mean, they were like a 40-some point underdog, lost by 17. A legit 17-point loss, too. It wasn't like they were plus 7 in turnovers either. I mean, they played Tennessee really tough, especially in the first half. So I liked what I've seen from them when they step up and play as far as competition. He's brought a lot of excitement with him, obviously being a young coach. And where does that show up? Well, I mean, let's look at recruiting class. Even though he got hired in December, and you got a December signing period, and then, of course, you got the February signing period, but in just a matter of a few weeks, he just signed the best recruiting class in modern UTEP football history, number 82. Doesn't sound great, but guys, Number 82 is about 40 spots higher than what their average has been the last 12 years. I looked at 2011 to 2023, average recruiting class rank for UTEP, 123. 123, 82, 40 spots higher in just a few weeks. Edge Jones, tight end Collins, incoming freshman recruits, 2 highest rated recruits in modern UTEP history. They welcome in a bunch of transfers as well. I mean, this roster's been completely overhauled. A majority of those transfers are coming from Austin Peay. In fact, 11 of them are. Leading rusher from Austin Peay last year, Javon Jackson, ran for almost 1,400 yards. He comes over with Scotty Walden along with 3 of the top 4 wide receivers. Goodman's the kid that stood out to me. He's averaging 21 yards per catch. 2 of the top 4 tacklers from Austin Peay's defense last year come with Scotty Walden. And you're thinking, well, they're just Austin Peay players. I mean, who cares? We're talking this is FBS football. I'm here to tell you guys, on a neutral field, at the end of last season, Austin Peay would have been a short favorite over UTEP. That's how good Austin Peay was. So these are legitimate players that I don't think the jump to Conference USA, at least against the middle teams and the bottom teams of that league, is going to be that big of an adjustment for these kids, especially when they played against FBS opponents already and quality ones like Alabama and Tennessee already. I don't think it's going to be that big of a culture shock for them. 0 starters, though, a concern for me is on the offensive line. 0 starters back. Again, tell me if this sounds like a broken record. A couple starters from Austin Peay come over to help fill in that gap a little bit. Only 5 returning starters in total back for UTEP. One of them is the quarterback, Cade McConnell, who did okay last year, led him in passing. I'd like to see the accuracy be a little bit better, 53.5%. Again, it's not, 30 years ago. 53.5% is pretty bad. You got to be at minimum 60. He did. I was able to watch a pretty extended highlight package of the spring game. He had a quality spring game as far as McConnell, and I think he probably maybe starts the season off as the quarterback. Rewatching the tape from last year, unfortunately, a couple of guys that really stood out. I mean, really good quality players. Kelly Akari, their wide receiver from last year, had over 1,000 yards, or nearly 1,000 yards. He averaged 21.5 yards per catch. And the linebacker, Tyrese Knight, 140 tackles. I mean, they just weren't productive. I mean, these are legitimate players that can play at a high level. Akari transferred to Mississippi State. He'll be a starting wide receiver in the SEC this year. Their wide receiver that they lost, they're probably their best player on offense. Knight got drafted in the 4th round. So, I mean, that's 2 high-quality players they lose. 2 other guys that really stood out on tape, Burgess and Hankins, they're 2 running backs, were very impressive. Again, both of those guys gone. So, those are some losses they're going to have to overcome. Guys that did stood out that are returning, both of them on defense. Westmoreland, a defensive end, 7.5 sacks. He stood out. And in fact, he was the first guy Scotty Walden mentioned who was impressive early in the spring. First name off of the top of his head as far as who was impressing. Maurice Westmoreland, defensive end. Another guy that looked good to me as far as tape last year, especially in this year's spring game, A.J. Odom's a cornerback. He's number 1. He looked at least has the right measurables and the right movements. I think he'll be okay, and he was a starter last year. As far as prediction for the upcoming season, it's going to be tough for me to narrow. Again, with no season win total numbers out there, I'm not going to say, well, Louisiana Tech's win total should be 3.75 type of stuff. You're not going to get that out of me. UTEP, I think there's certainly going to be a little bit of variation with their win total. I think the ceiling is very high, and what they really remind me of when you got a team with the massive roster turnover reminds me a lot of Texas State. If you're looking for a team similar to Texas State last year, and if you're not familiar with that, Texas State brought in a young, dynamic coach from the FCS who also brought in a bunch of his transfers from that school and did better than recent history said that school could do. I think this reminds me of a kind of a Texas State situation. I think if it doesn't happen this year, it's going to happen in the next few years as far as UTEP really making a leap here, just because of the influx of quality talent. So that's UTEP. Let's move it along. And again, we're going from the worst teams in the conference, moving our way upwards. I think, speaking of that, you guys are going to be surprised the next team I break down because they won 10 games a year ago. But I'm not expecting much this year. And that's New Mexico State, who has to replace a lot of players and, more importantly, replace their coach, Jerry Kill, who worked wonders with this program the last couple of years. I mean, they're off their best back-to-back season since the 1960s, 60 years, as far as the last time New Mexico State saw as much success as they had the last 2 years as far as the gridiron goes. Tony Sanchez is the new head coach. Don't love the hire, but I will say New Mexico State was put in a bad position. Jerry was a surprise considering he had so much success that he left for Vanderbilt just to be an assistant. Sanchez was with the team the last couple of years, the wide receiver coach. If you're not familiar with him, he was the UNLV head coach for 5 years and was also the Bishop Gorman High School coach, won a bunch of national championships at the high school level, a la Jerry Faust. I will say this, a lot of people didn't like him at UNLV. His first year was the first year I moved to Vegas, so I followed him at least more closely than I would a regular group of five type of job. I thought he really helped build some infrastructure for UNLV. I mean, if you really go back through it, why did UNLV have an historical season in 2023? Honestly, I think Tony Sanchez started laying some of that foundation down several years earlier as far as getting the athletic football complex built and whatnot. So I think he can fundraise and at least, go out there and shake some hands and get some money. And honestly, guys, with the NIL, the portal and whatnot, that's a major factor as far as being a head coach in today's day and age. It's not about the ability to be unbelievable X's and O's. That's what you hire coordinators for. It's about raising money and recruiting. And I think Sanchez is okay in that regard. He is a New Mexico State alum, so this job does mean something to him. He's just not, taking the job because that was the only thing available to him. With that being said, though, I love, if you know me and have followed me over the last 10-plus years, I love fading historical outliers. I just got done telling you New Mexico State's off their best back-to-back seasons in 60 years. One thing that I do like on this year's team, and then we'll get into the negatives. I'll start with a positive. They got all five starters back on the offensive line. And their best player is probably their center, Yarrow. Another good player for them is their backup running back, Monty Watkins, average almost 10 yards per carry. So there's some stuff and pieces to work with offensively, especially when you got all five guys back up front. The problem is 0 skill position guys are back. And when you're considering how explosive they were last year, they're number 12. You don't think explosiveness with New Mexico State football, but they're number 12 in offensive yards per play last year. But no Diego Pavia. Guy scrambling around and could make big plays with his feet and his arm. He's at Vanderbilt. Their top running back, Star Thomas, hit the portal in April. That was a big loss. Top wide receiver went to Cal. Another wide receiver, Hudson, went to Mississippi State. They didn't settle the quarterback competition in the spring. 4 guys are competing, and they split up reps evenly. So I don't like that at all, that they don't have an answer there. When you got 4 quarterbacks, you got none. 15 of their top 18 tacklers on defense are gone. 13 of them transferred out. So they're expected to be a very experienced team, and they're not. Going back to tape, no one really stood out, at least as who's coming back on that defensive side of the ball. I'll give them another positive, though. I do like the DC hire that Sanchez made. Joe Morris is their DC. He's been at Sam Houston State the last few years. Sam Houston State's had a quality defense, at least at this level, the last couple of years. So I don't mind that hire. But what I do mind and what really concerns me is, as I'm recording this on May the 21st, 11 transfers in, 39 out. This team's not going to be anywhere close to 85 scholarships this upcoming season. And if you think, they're not worth much, they're replacement level players as far as New Mexico State goes, they'll be able to get some guys from the FCS and whatnot. 14 of those 39 transfers went to Power 4 schools. There was some talent on that roster last year. And if you don't believe me, I just rewatched it the night before I'm taping this. I watched the Auburn game. They dominated Auburn. I know Auburn was lackadaisical and lacked some energy, but, there was nothing fluky. New Mexico State owned the line of scrimmage. So there was some legitimate players on last year's team, and almost all of them are gone. So I guess as I'm summing up New Mexico State as of right now at the end of May, I'm not sure there'll be a group of 5 team that takes a bigger step back this season. So if you guys want a hot take, a strong take, there's one for you. Let's move along. Another team with a new head coach, Middle Tennessee. This is a program that's had a lot of continuity the last almost 2 decades because Rick Stockstill had been their head coach for 18 years. He's gone. Enter Derek Mason, who should be familiar with the area. Not long ago, he coached, obviously, several seasons at Vanderbilt there in the Middle Tennessee area. Mason in the spring, I thought it was, pretty revealing. He said this, concluding spring practices. I appreciate the honesty. He said, hey, I think this team's much better than I anticipated. I wasn't, sure what to expect, but they're better than he anticipated. And I'll be honest with you, breaking down last year's team, statistical categories, and just watching tape, they were better than the record last year. 1-4 in games decided by 7 points or less. They were changed a couple plays, and that team's fighting for another bowl game. They were plus 0.2 in yards per play margin. Again, that's more indicative of a team that wins 6 games, not 4. As far as returning production, like a lot of these other Conference USA teams, and you're going to hear me say this a lot throughout the group of 5 previews, not much coming back. Lack of returning production. 7 returning starters is all. Now, Vadiato is back at quarterback. He completed a high percent of his passes at 60. Normally, you don't see guys that complete 67% of their passes, also throw 13 interceptions, so he's got to clean up the turnovers. Krettel, their leading rusher, I think he's a solid back for them. The guy who really stood out to me on tape was their wide receiver, Holden Willis. If he put on weight, he'd look more like a tight end. He's 6'4", 220. He was their leading receiver last year. He certainly impressed me as far as rewatching some of the games from a year ago. The guy that really impressed me watching this year's spring drills, wide receiver, number 1. I'm like, who in the hell is this guy? Because I didn't see him watching games from a season ago. And lo and behold, it's a kid from Auburn. Amari Kelly's his name. I think that's a name to know as far as if you're looking for players to stand out from Middle Tennessee this upcoming season. Amari Kelly from Auburn. He's number 1 as far as numbers numerically on the roster. Let's talk offensive coordinator because you got a new one. Bodie Reeder comes over from Northern Iowa. Maybe Northern Iowa is a team you might want to fade in the FCS. They lost 2 good coordinators. Keep that in your back pocket for those that bet FCS. And Northern Iowa typically wasn't known as a good offense, but the last couple of years they've had a good quarterback, Theo Day's his name, and they've thrown the ball quite well with Reeder as the offensive coordinator. So it's an okay hire. On the other side of the ball, a long-time defensive coordinator. I don't think much of him, but, we're talking comparing it to the Power 5 level, the NFL level, to now we're talking maybe the worst conference at the FBS level, and that's Brian Stewart. He's the new DC. And the fact that Derek Mason's forte is on the defense side of the ball, it's not concerning to me as far as that hire goes. What is concerning to me, though, 5 defensive players transfer to Power 4 schools. Another broken record here. All these guys are leaving for Power 4 schools. Top 2 tacklers are gone. And another concern for me, I do follow recruiting. Their average recruiting rank the last 4 years, 119. Prior to that, if you looked at the previous 8 years, their average recruiting rank was 91. Doesn't sound like a lot, but 30 spots at the G5 level is a difference of being a bowl contender every year in, year out, and a team that's going to be 3-9, 4-8 every single year. So that's something to keep an eye on. I don't think they have quality depth, even though Mason they said he thinks the team's better than anticipated. As far as the schedule goes, I think it's a tough start. Underdogs in 4 of their first 5 games. The back half certainly lends itself for some success. I think that they certainly can top last year's 4 wins, but I think 6, it might be stretching it. So you do the math there where I think the win total should be. Sam Houston State is next, the team that was new to the conference last year, new to the FBS last year. This is a team that, I like let's start off with their head coach, Casey Keeler, 11th season here. He's heading to the Hall of Fame when he decides to hang it up. He's got 262 career wins. He's coached in 9 national championship games at the D3 and FCS level. The problem is he's 2-7 in those games. So this is a guy that we'd probably think a little bit even more highly of had he won a couple more national championships, but still a very high-quality coach and wins wherever he's at. And speaking of winning, Sam Houston State, after that horrendous 0-8 start where they couldn't buy a break, it seemed like for week after week, they were able to win 3 of their last 4 games. It could have been a better season for them last year because they were only 2-5 in games decided by 7 points or less. But you are what you are as far as Sam Houston State, because you look at them statistically, number 127 yards per play margin, bottom team nationally, number 123 in yards per game margin. So you look at those two stats and you think, well, I mean, sign you up for 3-9 with those two stats. As far as this year's team goes, returning starters, 14 of them, 9 on offense, 5 on defense. One of the more experienced teams in the conference. The guy that I like on offense is their wide receiver, Noah Smith. I thought he was their best offensive player a year ago on a team that really struggled offensively, but he flashed in multiple games. One thing that usually doesn't get properly accounted for, or at least properly accounted for in the early markets, all 5 starters back on the offensive line for Sam Houston State. They do bring in a transfer. They lose their quarterback Shoemaker, who I wasn't a fan of. They bring in Jace Bauer, quarterback from Central Michigan, their starter last year. I like the kid. He can run. He was okay throwing the football. I think it's an upgrade at quarterback. One thing that does concern me is they lost a pair of defensive starters post-spring to the portal. Crosby and Hobbs on defense. Crosby and Hobbs sounds like a 1970s soft rock band. But Crosby and Hobbs are gone. 2 starters post-spring. Concerns me there. They do have a new DC. This is a name. Jot down, put it in a safe, pull it out in 4 or 5 years. They'll probably be a well-known commodity. But from what I've been reading and what I've been hearing, this Skylar Cassidy kid, he's only 29. He's been the DC at Abilene Christian the last couple of years, and they've been good at the FCS level on defense. I'm hearing he has a very bright future. So Skylar Cassidy, new DC, 29 years old. It's a name you need to know, I think, for at least not necessarily for this year, but down the road as far as future maybe stars in the coaching profession. Good thing about Sam Houston State. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, follow me at BradPower7 on Twitter, or you can follow the guys as well. But if you follow me on Twitter, I was bemoaning over the weekend the lack of good quality Week 1 games. Now, there's a few. Certainly that triple header on ABC on that opening Saturday when you got Clemson and Georgia, the noon game, the 3:30 games, Miami at Florida, and the nightcap is Notre Dame at Texas A&M, and then the Sunday night games, LSU and USC. That's great. But, man, you get much further beyond that, it's not a great card as far as quality games with quality teams. Even at the G5 level, not a lot of quality games as far as G5 versus G5, where we're going to get a really good idea of how good these teams can be this upcoming season. That's not the case for Sam Houston State. They open up on the road at Rice. Rice is going to be a pretty good team in the American this year, so we'll see if Sam Houston State's improving there. And then home games in September, Hawaii, New Mexico State. Again, if they're going to take the next step, got to win one of those. So what do I think? I think they topped last year's win total. They'll flirt with bowl eligibility as far as Sam Houston State. A few more teams. I know it's just me. Maybe it sounds like I'm long-winded here, but we'll continue to go. And, again, I'm going to guarantee you guys, maybe we're not deep diving 15 minutes on each team, but we will cover every single one of these group of 5 teams here in the coming weeks. And let's talk another one here, Jacksonville State, a team unlike Sam Houston State that didn't struggle in the transition to the FBS. They couldn't have had a more successful first season at the FBS. They won 9 games, including the bowl game in overtime. Very dramatic win. Rich Rodriguez, working wonders. Guy can still coach, folks. He's 18-6 here those first 2 years. And there wasn't, anything fluky about last year's 9 wins. They controlled the line of scrimmage, plus 22 in sack differential, plus two yards as far as net yards per carry. That's owning the line of scrimmage, folks. Other solid statistical measures, number 49 in yards per play margin, 39 in yards per game margin, 29 in scoring margin. Yep, that sounds like at least at the G5 level, a 9-win team. They were 4-1 in close games, so you worry about that. Maybe there's a little bit of regression there, but let's talk returning starters. A little bit of concern here, like most G5 teams. Only 9. 5 on offense, 4 on defense. Quarterback Zion Webb, wasn't a big fan, but he had a ton of experience. He's gone. Leading rusher Jackson's gone. Top wide receiver really flashed to me, Perry Carter, in multiple games. I liked him. He's gone. And another concern for me is, their top defensive player gone. And this was, post-spring. Hardy, the defensive end, he transferred along with 3 other starters, transferred post-spring. Hardy was a guy that had 8.5 sacks, 16 tackles for loss last year. He's going to go to a Power 4 school probably. So that's a major loss. As far as the spring and who's coming back, I'm actually, instead of quarterback and stuff and skill position, I'm going to talk about an offensive lineman. This is a name you need to know. Clay Webb is one of the best, probably the best group of 5 offensive linemen in the country. He plays left guard. He's a former 5-star kid. Got in a little bit of trouble at Georgia. Last year, he graded out as the 3rd best offensive lineman in the country, according to Pro Football Focus. I know, Pro Football Focus sometimes leaves, well, I mean, maybe half the time leaves a little bit to be desired as far as grading offensive linemen. I will say, though, their top 2 offensive linemen last year, Joe Alt was 1 as far as their grades. Fuaga from Oregon State was their number 2 guy. Both those guys were in the top 15 picks of the draft. Clay Webb was number 3, the left guard at Jacksonville State. So at least I'm not saying he's going to go in top 15 picks, but he's going to get probably an early round draft grade when it's all said and done, and he'll probably be, if not a preseason All-American, should be on the short list there. So Clay Webb's a name you need to know if you want to sound smart around the water cooler this offseason. Quarterback play, since they lose Zion Webb, insert Zion Turner from Connecticut, a transfer. He took the first-team reps at quarterback in the spring, followed by Logan Smothers, who returns. He got a lot of snaps the last couple years. Keep an eye. They did bring in a quarterback transfer from Fuhrman, Tyler Huff. I like that kid. He's got a little bit of moxie with him. I like the way he's played at Fuhrman. A good FCS team the last few years. They also bring in a running back, Andrew Paul from Georgia, Spector, a wide receiver from Clemson. I like what they did in the portal. Speaking of the portal, a guy that removed his name from the portal, Ron Wiggins, I thought that was pretty good. Running back, a guy that should fill in that gap nicely with Jackson gone. And Wiggins has played a lot of football for him the last couple of years. A guy that flashed to me on the defensive side of the ball that comes back for them the last couple of years, J. Rock Swain. That's right, J. Rock Swain. He plays defensive end for them. He's the guy to look out for this year, especially with Hardy gone on that defensive line. And do have a new DC, Jacksonville State. Luke Olson, not Lute Olson, Luke Olson. Comes over from Tulsa and TCU. He's under Joe Gillespie. So what's that mean? Well, they're going to run a 3-3-5 type of style of defense. And, good thing with Jacksonville State, similar to Sam Houston State, we'll get a really good week 1 game. We'll figure out how good Jacksonville State is and their opponent, Coastal Carolina, because they get a home game against them in week 1. And I think that'll be a very competitive game. They do have 3 tough road games at Louisville, at Liberty, who we'll get to in a little bit, and then at Western Kentucky. 2 teams in the conference I haven't talked about yet. So they're 2 of the top teams in the conference besides Jacksonville State, and they got to play them both on the road. But I'm here to tell you, Jacksonville State will be favored in their other 8 games. So this looks like another bowl season for Jacksonville State as they continue to win here under Rich Rodriguez. Next up, speaking of winning consistently, Western Kentucky is the second to last team I'm going to talk about here on the preview podcast for Conference USA. Tyson Helton's back for his 6th season. Doing a nice job. I mean, it's not overwhelming. It's not what, Brom did as far as winning as many games as that, like he did at Western Kentucky, but 40-26, 4-1 in 5 years, 4-1 bowl record, I should say, in 5 years. Last year, pretty much season played out to be expected. Took care of business against everyone they should have, including the dramatic 28-point come from behind bowl win over Old Dominion. They lost the 5 best teams they played though. That being Ohio State, Troy, Jacksonville State, Liberty, New Mexico State. I mean, those 5 teams went 54-15. So nothing ill will towards Western Kentucky for losing to those 5 teams because most teams did. One thing that was a little underwhelming for me, just basic statistics for Western Kentucky last year's team. Not 71 in yards per play margin, 84 in yards per game margin, 66 in points per game margin. Doesn't sound like an 8-win team. It doesn't sound like, especially, there's been some explosiveness as far as Western Kentucky. So we'll see if they can get that shored up. I got concerns because you lose Austin Reed at quarterback. Malachi Corley was one of the more productive wide receivers in college football the last couple of years. So they'll have to fill some void there. Luckily for them, I like what they did in the transfer portal. Speaking of that, best transfer class in Conference USA, led by quarterback TJ Finley. Texas State last year, Auburn prior to that. I mean, he's It's the third different school for him, but he did finally have that solid season throwing the football last year at Texas State, 67%, 24-8 ratio. Obviously, Finley has all the physical tools at 6'7", 250, looks like Cam Newton. So I think he'll be fine in this offense. I did in the bowl game, even with Austin Reed sitting out that game. Guys that really flashed to me was Elijah Young at running back, and particularly Dalvin Smith, who's got the physical attributes. He's a little thin, but, man, 6'3". I mean, go watch the tape against Old Dominion. He had two, highlight reel, like catch of the year type of plays in the bowl game. So I look for Dalvin Smith to be that next wide receiver as far as in that lineage of a very productive Western Kentucky wide receivers that we've seen in recent years. So they'll be fine there. Another thing that I think is a positive for Western Kentucky's chances to compete, to be a contender in the league this year, a lot of guys withdrew their name from the portal. Key guys. Had they lost these guys, I certainly would have had them behind Jacksonville State in the power ratings. Leslie on the offensive line, a pair of starting cornerbacks, Johnson and Stout. Leslie's their top returning offensive lineman. Johnson and Stout were their top two graded defensive players at Pro Football Focus. So legitimate guys that entered the portal postseason decided to come back, withdrew their name from the portal. Positive. 3 starters from there on that side, on that front. Linebacker Kylan Guidry was a guy, 6'4", 230, flashed on tape for me as their leading tackler. It's another name I wanted to mention. Another positive as far as Western Kentucky this year, schedule sets up pretty nicely. Outside of 3 tough road games, at Alabama, at Boston College, at Liberty, should probably be favored in their other 9 games. Do the math there. I'm not calling that the win total should be 9-3, but the chances of improving off of last year's 8 wins, or at least 7 wins in the regular season, are pretty decent. Speaking of pretty decent, final team here, as I've already talked for 45 minutes on Conference USA football, flying solo, is the team that had an historic season last year. Liberty, the Flames, from Lynchburg, Virginia. Obviously started the season last year 13-0, good enough to get to the Fiesta Bowl where they were thoroughly beaten by Oregon in that game. But statistically speaking, they should have been a 13-0 team because they're number 11 in yards per play margin, number 11 in yards per game margin, number 15 in points per game margin, plus 2.1 yards per carry margin, plus 16 sacks. A legitimate team. It's not like they were fortunate as far as the regular season to finish unbeaten. Offense was top 5 in yards per play and yards per game. Defense left a little bit to be desired. Don't believe me? Go watch the New Mexico State Conference USA Championship game. Mexico State moved the football consistently. Even after Pavia left the game, they still were throwing it and chucking it down the field. So that's a concern for me for Liberty. One thing that's not a concern, coaching staff. Jamie Chadwell's back. Both coordinators are back. Chadwell, all he does is win. 44-7 now the last 4 years, dating back to Coastal Carolina. 44-7, folks. That guy's a winner. Returning starters for them, they're solidly, got some returning production. 6 on offense, 7 on defense, and arguably by far the 2 best players in the league are on Liberty, and they both return. Caden Salter at quarterback, 32-6 ratio, ran for over 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6.7 yards per carry. Entered his name in the portal, withdrew it within a week or 2. So it tells me that somebody probably ponied up there at Liberty. They do have money. And that's another point I want to get to. They have money, unlike a lot of these other schools in this league. And there is a big discrepancy, not only in my power rating for this year, as far as the preseason, between Liberty and the rest of the league, but as far as expenditures and overall amount spent, or the ability to spend through NIL and the portal, Liberty's got probably as much as the next 3 teams do combined. That's how big of the gap is. Another key player back for them, running back, Quentin Cooley, ran for 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns, over 6 yards per carry. He's back. Salter and Cooley are the best quarterback, running back combo in the group of 5. One thing that concerns me, though, do lose 4 of their top 5 receivers. C.J. Daniels off to LSU. Another thing that concerns me, their left tackle, transferred to Vanderbilt post-spring. A little bit of concerns there. I'm not sure the offense is going to be top 5 in the country in yards per play this year. Defense has enough back. 9 of their top 13 tacklers are back on defense. Do think it's disturbing. I said pass defense was a little bit of a concern last year, particularly safety position. both corners, their starting corners left. Preston Hodge went to Colorado. Kobe Singleton went to Oregon State. Watched the Colorado spring game. Coach Prime leaves a lot to be desired in a lot of areas, but I think he does know defensive back play, and he really is high on Preston Hodge. I mean, obviously, he loves his Travis Hunter, but he was talking Preston Hodge a lot in that Colorado spring game. So that's a big loss for Liberty, losing a guy like Preston Hodge at cornerback, and did end up losing 5 starters to Power 4 schools in the portal. So there was a little bit of talent, to say the least, lost. But obviously, I get to the conclusion here. They're clearly ahead of Western Kentucky, and Jacksonville State should be the biggest favorite in any conference. Weakest schedule, second year in a row, no Power 4 team on the schedule. It ranks number 134 in my strength of schedule rankings right now out of 134 teams. They get Jacksonville State and Western Kentucky at home. The 2 teams that are capable of beating Liberty. Well, they have to both come to Liberty. I think Liberty will be at least a touchdown favorite in 11 of their games. The only one in question at App State. And they'll either be a short favorite, pick'em game, or a short dog in that game at App State. So another season where very capable of running the table. And I think they will have to run the table this year. They're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. I think they'll have to go 13-0 again and just hope like a league champ like Boise State or Memphis has more than one loss. If it's 13-0 Liberty versus a 1-loss Boise State or a 1-loss Memphis, I think the committee is going to give Boise State or Memphis the nod. Do with that information what you will, as far as you can get some will they make the playoff or not? That market's a little bit available for certain teams at the G5 level. So I think in order for Liberty to get to the playoff, they're going to have to go unbeaten. That's tough to do, even though, they got layups on a majority of their games. But that'll pretty much do it, guys. I know I was a little rusty on Conference USA. I apologize for the monotone. I didn't have any, the little sound bites or inputs here or comments from the guys, but it's going to be me. You settle in here for the next month as I break down every single team at the G5 level. And then, obviously, most importantly, we'll have some best bets as soon as those markets open up. Unfortunately, they haven't, but with Memorial Day weekend right around the corner here, we thought we'd give you guys some content, because I know you're starving for football content. NBA's winding down, NHL's winding down, draft's over with. As far as the NFL goes, it's time to start talking football and previewing these teams. So that's why we thought we'd give you a little bit of a taste as far as the preview series goes. Next week, again, I'll be back with you guys. We'll be breaking down the MAC, near and dear to my heart. My alma mater is a MAC school, so breaking down that, and hopefully a couple of these sports books open up some win totals as far as the MAC, and we can give you a best bet. But for that, that'll do it as far as the Conference USA preview. Again, no surprise. Liberty at the top, newcomer Kennesaw State at the bottom, everybody else in between. We'll talk to you guys next week.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.